and welcome to this week's Easy Like a Sunday story, written by Sherry Newton and this week performed by me. And this story is called The Keepsake Box. My fingers hovered over the lid of the box with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. I knew the kind of box this was. Its hard-to-reach hiding place, inside an old boot box on top of the wardrobe but pushed to the back, was a telling sign that it meant something. Its discovery sent a spark of excitement to my tummy, like the flicker of a petrol lighter, followed by the comfort of the slow-burning flame, knowing that I'd found another part of her. The ivory lace ribbon securing the lid was telling. It was pretty. It looked expensive. It whispered, special, private. But it was the fact that I'd never seen it before that struck me the most. Nana had looked after me a lot as a child. She'd picked me up from school, always with 2 opal fruits, purple days were the best, and then we'd go back to hers until Mum finished work, so I spent a lot of time at her house, and she'd often let me explore. She didn't mind me going in her room and sitting at her dressing table and using her old-fashioned soft brushes and powder puffs and winding the dial on her jewellery box to make the ballerina spin. I was always respectful to leave my grandpa's stuff alone, as I'd never met him. He'd passed away before I was born, so it didn't seem right to look at his things. But Nana seemed comfortable with me having free rein otherwise. So if this box had been accessible, I definitely would have come across it. Unless, of course, Nana was happy for me to explore because she'd hidden away the things that she didn't want me to see. I felt a rush of love for my Nana, and it simultaneously filled my eyes and my heart, making them both feel heavy. I put my hand on the part of my chest that was thumping as if trying to hush the disturbance. Is it prying if she's not here anymore? I said to myself. If I don't look, what will I do with these things? I wondered if there was an unwritten rule that secrets lose their validity once a person has passed. Are the benefactors as entitled to them as they are to belongings? Or should they go quietly and respectfully with the owner to their grave? The truth is, whatever was right or wrong, when you lose someone that you love so much, and right in front of you is a part of them that you never knew, it's impossible to resist. I closed my eyes, which pierced the teardrops which had been teetering on my lower lids, and nervously untied the bow. The first thing that caught my eye was a brooch. It was a brilliant blue in varying shades, mixed with clear crystals and silver. There were rows of pave ribbons connecting 4 rich blue teardrop-shaped crystals, surrounding them by various sizes of round, dark and lighter blue stones. I'd never seen it before in my life or heard it mentioned. Where on earth had she got it, and why was she hiding it? I didn't have time to linger on it, as my attention swiftly moved to something else. There were some newspaper articles from 1942, neatly cut out and folded once. They all seemed to be relating to an airplane crash. Nana had been in the Women's Air Force during the war, and I suddenly felt annoyed with myself that I didn't know more about what she'd actually done. I knew she'd worked with Morse code, and I'd seen photos of her looking so strong and elegant in her uniform, but sadly I didn't know much more. And now I can't ask her, I thought. I swallowed a lump in my throat and continued to skim the clippings. A plane had crashed, but the pilot had miraculously survived. It had been hit by the Luftwaffe, but the pilot had managed to land it and escaped before it was engulfed in flames. There was a cutting of him receiving a medal for bravery. He'd lost a leg, but was standing with the aid of a crutch to receive his honour. His name was Albert John Lewis. Much like the brooch, I'd never seen or heard of him before. I had so many questions already. I didn't know why, but I thought opening the box would answer my questions, not give me so many more. Maybe the letters would help. There were many, and they were tied in bundles with red ribbons. Plainer than the lace used for the outside, but pretty all the same. I didn't know where to start, so I just picked one at random. Dearest E, my love. I used to long to call you, my love, for the world to hear. Now I long to see you and say it just for you to hear. I miss you so. Saying goodbye was hard, but we managed. And I thought that maybe that would be the worst part. But it's the emptiness without you that hurts the most. It doesn't grow easier with time. Although you will say that not enough time has passed for me to know this yet. But I know. There has not been one morning that I have awoken where you haven't been the first thing on my mind. This morning, I roused after a wonderful dream where we were happy together, and I felt such joy and peace as I stirred from my sleep. Then the emptiness engulfed me like the flames of my plane, and I realised it was not real, and you were not in my arms. I know I shouldn't write. I know you asked me not to, but I cannot let go. There must be a way. You once said to me that love conquers all. Well, if that's what you truly believe, then surely we can win. You know where to find me, my love. Please come. I will be waiting. Your ever-loving B. B? I wondered. He mentioned the plane. Did he have something to do with the man in the newspapers? E must have been Nana. Her name was Edith. But I was certain she'd married Grandpa before the war. Had she been unfaithful to him? I couldn't imagine that. She'd always spoken so fondly of him. What a kind and funny man he was, how he'd do anything for anyone, how it had been tough but they'd been happy. I had no choice but to read on. The letters were beautiful to look at, with exquisite handwriting. The effort and care in the ink bounced off the paper like music to a conductor. They were so clearly written in the days where a man would wear a suit and shine his shoes to impress a woman, and it was only fitting that he'd use good quality paper and scribe in his finest hand. I spent the next few hours devouring the letters, trying to piece the clues together. I was sat on the floor in the corner of the room. I didn't realise I hadn't moved for ages. I had pins and needles in both my legs, and my mouth was so dry, but I couldn't stop reading. The words were so moving and heartbreaking. I cried and felt angry and hopeless for them. I felt hopeful for true love and then disloyal to my grandpa at times. I felt torn, as if it was me in this turmoil. The letters had painted the picture that B was indeed Albert Lewis, the hero war pilot that had survived the Luftwaffe attack. He was nicknamed Bertie for short. When he'd recovered from his injuries, he'd assumed desk duties with the RAF at Highgate and met my nana. My grandpa must have been away at war. The letters only started after my grandpa had returned, and my nana must have broken it off. I was able to know some details of their time together, as Bertie often wrote his fond memories in his letters, perhaps hoping that the revisiting of them might make my nana change her mind. He often wrote of wishing he'd met her first, and how circumstance was cruel, but that he would rather have had their short time together than none at all. It seemed that they were very much in love, and from what I could make out, spent time together for around 2 years. It struck me as odd that there were no letters from my grandpa. I wondered if maybe they were in another box, or if indeed he could write, or if he was in a position at the war where he was unable to keep in touch. In a way, it made me feel better about Nana betraying him. I tried to move, but the pins and needles were in the unbearable stage where it's a cat's whisker that would brush past you and you'd scream out dramatically. Just one more until it subsides, I told myself. But this next sheet of paper was not a letter from Bertie. As I unfolded it, the gasp caught my dry throat and made me stutter and choke. It was a telegram informing my nana that her husband, Reginald Perry, had been taken as a prisoner of war in Nazi-occupied Poland. It was dated 1940. My grandpa was a prisoner of war. I had no idea. I sat in silence. It was a reaction of shock, but also respect. The poor man. Indeed, all of those men. I looked for more clues, and soon after I found a document for his release at the end of the war. He'd spent almost the entire war in captivity. I wept. Now it made sense. My Nana had no idea if he was still alive. She had no way of knowing if he was coming back. She must have been devastated, and her hope must have dwindled as the years went by. Then one day she meets this superhero who falls in love with her and who is there for her. And the only thing standing in her way is this uncertain wish. And no wonder Bertie truly believed that they would be together. He didn't think Grandpa was coming back either. How that news of Grandpa's arrival must have landed, I couldn't imagine. Another piece of paper that wasn't a letter caught my eye. It was a familiar colour, and my heart leapt into my mouth as I guessed what it was. A birth certificate. My father's. Dated 7th of May, 1946. Mother, Edith Rose. Father, Reginald Walter Parry. But of course, he couldn't have been. The Second World War didn't finish until the 2nd of September 1945. Grandpa wasn't released until then. Bertie was my dad's biological father. My grandfather. I became really hot, and I was so thirsty and emotional I wanted to cry, but I felt like there was no moisture left in my body. I felt a whoosh rush over me, and then everything went black. I nervously waited in line in the grounds of the beautiful Leeds Castle, taking in the luscious landscaping and in awe of the building's history. I still couldn't believe they had black swans. They were a light distraction to fill the time. It was a bright summer's day, and the Antiques Roadshow was busy. It was a fascinating sight. People carrying wares in all shapes and sizes. I played a game with myself, trying to guess what could be inside some of the varying cases and covers. There would be millions of pounds and centuries of history in this crowd. I marvelled. But I bet nobody has a story of a discovery like mine, I whispered to myself. I tweaked the truth that I presented to the expert. I wasn't about to uncover the secret that had been kept for generations and just blurt it out on national television. Phil, the expert, seemed very charmed with my story anyway, and accepting of my brief details. He thought it was wonderful that it had been discovered in a keepsake box, and I mentioned that I believed it was obtained or gifted to my Nana during the war. Phil was able to tell me that it was from the 1930s or 40s and was, he believed, a rare piece by a brooch maker called Eisenberg. It was Austrian and probably had been acquired during the war by someone who had travelled. The things I called teardrops were navettes, and the rich blue colour was blue topaz. There was also aquamarine stones, turquoise stones, and sapphires. The clear crystals were indeed diamonds, and the silver back was white gold. So it hadn't been the costume piece I'd assumed. It was strange. I hadn't even considered that it could be valuable. I just wanted to know more about it. I'd become obsessed with gleaning any information I could about the whole situation. My grandpa, my Nana, and Bertie. I'd spoken with my mum, but she said Dad had never told her anything about it when they were married, and that perhaps he hadn't known. I drifted off on that thought for a second and came back to the conversation where Phil was saying that he thought the centre stone was in fact a blue diamond. I evidently knew nothing about this sort of thing, but I knew that I hadn't seen too many of those around. So in regards to valuation, I'd put an estimate on it of £15,000 to £20,000, but it really could do more than that at auction. I did the dry mouth gasp choke again, which is a shame as that will be on national television. I thanked Phil and turned away in disbelief. It had been a very peculiar time. I'd discovered that lots of things I'd had no reason to question could be a different truth entirely. I discovered that I had a different bloodline to the one I thought. I uncovered stories that my Nana was happy to take to her grave and that my grandpa certainly had. Or did he ever tell anyone? Or did Nana know that I would find it and that was her way of telling me? I think she would have asked me to destroy it if she didn't want me to know. And I would have. I thought about my grandpa and I admired him for accepting and loving my dad as his own. And I wonder if he ever knew the love that was between Nana and Bertie. I wondered if Nana ever regretted him coming home or regretted her affair. I wondered if Bertie ever got over her. I would never know. And I needed to decide what I could find out about my biological grandfather, or whether just to let sleeping dogs lie. I imagined it would be the same curiosity that opened the box that would be the overriding voice in that decision. And I asked myself if I regretted opening the box and looking inside. And the answer was no. Just when I thought that I had lost my Nana forever, I discovered a whole new part of her. And I had the joy of getting to know her all over again. The end.